Hey, good afternoon. And just a word of warning. Mark is blaming AI a lot today, because I happen to know that picture he showed you, kind of AI, this was his outfit at Ascot, I think, last week. He's got some other AI things that he's claiming not to be real either. So I would invite you to check in on Mark with that. Anyways, listen, I'm going to do the keynote, and I'll talk a little bit about the RFID, kind of the market, and how we're seeing the market, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategy and some of the things that we're doing, to build kind of a new RFID future with Zebra. So I think everybody here knows what we're up to, what we do. Certainly, the idea of connecting people, connecting them to the assets and to the data, the things that are important, that continues to be our mandate. And this is, RFID becomes a really big, important part of this as we think about how we deliver and collect data. So multimodal data capture, you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that throughout this. And that's going to be really, really important. I think for those of you who haven't been paying attention to what's been going on at Zebra, here's a few stats. The one I think I like, the one that always gets me kind of jazzed, is the amount of R&D that we spend. So you look at the number, the R&D that we spend per year is about 10% of our revenues, 10% of sales. And in many cases, it's much more than our nearest competitor's revenue. So this is a really important number. And I'll tell you that this has done us pretty well. So in 2024, the EMC portfolio, we measure a lot of our successes by measuring market share. Market share is dollars of the SAM, and so we actually took quite a bit of share. So we had the highest market share we've had in a long time from a mobile computing perspective. We were at 52% in 24. In EMEA, it was 60%, so that's fantastic. They took 9 points of share in 2024 over our competitors, so that's great. About 30 points of share globally for RFID. Mark has some work to do. It's about 21, 22%, maybe if we give him a nod for EMEA. But as we start to add more RFID into our portfolio, I think you'll start to see this really start to take off, notwithstanding the fact that the market itself is really starting to grow. And as you ask, what are some of the things that we're seeing that are making RFID really take off? Now, for those of you who've been in the business for a long time, if Joe White was up here, he'd tell you that he's been in the RFID business for 20, Joe White's my boss, by the way. He's been in the business for 20 years, and every year there was going to be this hockey stick of growth, and hadn't seen it in a long time. So now we're actually starting to see the RFID market really starting to take hold. And we think that there's a bunch of good reasons. You'll hear from our Impinj friends, and you'll hear from others that'll talk a little bit about standards and how this is impacting the market. Obviously, tag costs has always been a big piece of this. Why don't you get into RFID? Why aren't you using RFID? Customers would say, oh, it's too expensive to tag our goods. So the cost of tags, I think, is important. But we're also seeing a lot of retailers mandate RFID. And I know that one of our favorite tricks is to walk into a retail store and turn on an RFID reader. They may not know how many RFID tags are there, and you actually start looking and seeing how much of their inventory is tagged. So it's really starting to happen, and we're seeing a lot of great use cases manifest themselves out of all of this data accuracy or this data availability as well. So we're really pretty excited about what's happening in the market. And then if you look at a little bit about how do retailers see and what are the top use cases that are kind of driving them? So product ID, it's product visibility, if you will. This is a really big part of this. I think when you think about the ROI and you look at the visibility that you get, visibility kind of without RFID in a retail environment, you can think of 65 to 75% inventory visibility. You go to the mid 90s to the high 90s, 93 to 99% when you add RFID into retail. So product identification is really, really important. You think about labor, you hear all sorts of stuff about labor and labor inefficiency or not having enough labor. Within manufacturing and T&L, the ability to speed up a cycle count, for example, 20 times or 25 times faster to do cycle count with an RFID than to read barcodes manually. So you think about all of those use cases and workflows, you're receiving, you're shipping, putting to the shelf, picking. All of these use cases are greatly, greatly improved. And then when you think about the ROI, you think about the payback. So Jason and I were talking about ROI today, and it's like such an important method of selling selling our products. You know, the ROI can be as quick, we can see about 10 to 25% efficiencies. So when you think about the return on that investment, and the payback can be as quick as 12 to 24 months. On the apparel side, in apparel retail, we see it as quick as 6 months. So you can see that there's a real business case for adding RFID to workflows. And you know, when we think about tags, or we think about how do you measure how quickly or how much the market's growing, the number of tags being implemented in the space, I think, is as good as any. And you can see that it's growing exponentially. This market measured in dollars by 2030 is going to be about a $10 billion market when you think of all of the readers and the tags themselves and all the bits and pieces of software that gets sold. But the number of tags is really, really important. But we talked about the cost of tag being something that accelerates the adoption of RFID. Well, we think that the cost of reading tags, or more importantly, lowering the cost of reading tags, is also a really, really important, an important part of the strategy. And so you'll see that we're spending a lot of time adding RFID reading capabilities into the portfolio to generally reduce the cost of tags, or cost of reading, to democratize RFID, make it more available. If you can imagine, if every store associate on the floor that had a mobile device had the ability to read tag, to collect that data, how much data, what kind of visibility would we get if you had that capability? So we think that that's really, really important, and you'll see it as we go through into the portfolio as how we think about it. And then from a portfolio perspective, I think you know us and you know us well. We have a very broad set of products. We cover basically every RFID category that you can imagine. So handhelds in the traditional reader style, and now you're starting to see us do integrated RFID readers in our handhelds, which is pretty cool. You've seen portals. You know we're doing RFID print, and we're working at how to speed up the actually encoding tags, because this is becoming really important. Overhead fixed, our RFID antennas, and of course supplies, which is a huge big piece of it. But Zebra, this is kind of a one-stop shop. We can deliver this. Along with our partners, we can deliver everything you need in RFID from one company. And then this is an interesting slide. You know, you could call it a number of different things. It could be handheld to fixed, but we chose the word near field because we're really investing in near field reading. So this is short range RFID reading. This has a lot to do with the physics of what you can build into a handheld device, but you'll see when we launched the EM45 RFID, we launched it at NRF this year, and I've been using this product. This isn't an RFID one, of course. Why would I come here with an RFID one? But I've been using this product for well over a year, and it's a fantastic device. And you know, the ability to actually build integrated RFID with 5G so that you could simultaneously capture data while you're transmitting was a real feat. So, and I think that when you think about how and how our commitment, to platforming allows the data from each one of these devices to be shared. So it's starting to create a whole bunch of combinatorial capabilities that we really haven't seen before, where fixed readers and the near field short range reading devices are able to share data and kind of optimize everything. But it's really a horses for courses. And I get asked all the time, you know, are the integrated devices going to replace sleds? And the answer is clearly, just from a capability perspective, you know, that's not part of the strategy. The strategy continues to have a range of different reading types and read ranges. And so the sleds and connecting to mobile computers remains a really important part of our strategy. And so when you think about the breadth of the mobile computing portfolio, you're pretty familiar with seeing we have a variety of device categories, tablets, we've gotten into kiosks. We're really expanding and investing in our wearables. And then, of course, we have a variety of products in our healthcare platform as well. And this just denotes how we're, in the current portfolio, how much RFID, integrated UHF RFID, we've added into the product. So this is EM45, the TC53E RFID. That was the first product that we released as an integrated product. Our tablets support RFID from an expansion capability. And I'm going to show you a really interesting use case you're probably familiar with that we've built now off of our KC, our kiosk platform as well. And then similarly, off the WS50, we'll be launching in Q3 an RFID version of that product as well. So the EM45, this was a really interesting product for us. This was something that I think our customers and some of our partners questioned and said, hey, should we really be releasing a product that looks like a smartphone? I mean, your message previously has been, you need fit-for-purpose devices, and you shouldn't use consumer smartphones. So what gives? Why are you guys building this out? Well, the reality is this is as much a Zebra product as any of our fit-for-purpose products. What we're discovering is there are users in our environments that need the ergonomics or prefer the ergonomics of a smartphone. Could be for the persona type, could be supervisors and managers that are using these devices. We know from an operations perspective, they're looking for devices that kind of work like a smartphone, but also give them all the operational capabilities of some of our dedicated devices. And then in IT is always looking to say, hey, can we make sure that all of these products that we're managing work on the same common platform and are managed by the same set of tools? So this was one of the big value propositions. What you'll see, we did a lot of research and a lot of work in building this product. This is the first time that we've included a 50 megapixel camera in the product. Partly this was to offset and create more of a consumer-like experience, but we also invested heavily because this is really the only device that doesn't have a dedicated data capture engine built into the product. So we're relying entirely on that device for data capture. One of our big customers in the US needed a camera or a scanner that could scan at 100 pics per hour. So this is a reasonably intensive, not super intensive, but a reasonably intensive. And they also wanted to know how well the RFID would read. So we did a lot of experimentation, and we found that we could still squeeze more than 8 hours, so a full shift, out of camera scanning at a greater than 100 pics per hour, plus 30 RFID reads an hour. So we were really starting to stress this product out. But just to prove that this is, again, a product that's worthy of having the Zebra brand name on it. Then you look at the TC53E RFID. This was our first integrated RFID product. This is integrated with the same chipset, the same RFID radio that's in the RFD40. So again, very, very through and through Zebra product. And this product has really kind of allowed us to explore a lot of really new use cases. And I'm going to go into that in a few minutes when we talk about a use case at Sam's Club. But effectively, this product has really opened the door to a new type of auditing. So if you think about Sam's Club, which is a big, huge kind of a warehouse type of retail store, they installed portals to do their exit audit check. So if you think about how they used to do this, there was employees standing at the exit, and you would push your basket up. You've already gone through the point of sale. You push your basket up. They would take your receipt. They would look at it. They would look at the basket. And then they would take a marker and just check it off. And that was kind of their exit audit strategy. They since moved to using portals with vision and RFID. So you pass your cart now through. It looks down at the cart. It can actually identify the products that are there against the receipt. They also look and read RFID. And then these devices, the associates can use to do a further audit and check, so they can kind of wander around. And I'll show you what that looks like in a sec. One of the most important value propositions, of course, is how do you manage, how do you secure, how do you set up our devices? And I think that the mobility DNA story has been something that's been a really, really important one for us. And even today, it remains one of our biggest differentiators when it comes to our competitors. So as you know, all of our devices share the common BSPs and they share common platforms, and so that allows for them to be managed very easily. So too, when you think about how we set devices up, and maybe focusing on on developers for a second, our SDKs, data wedge, and even enterprise browser, all of these capabilities are common. So building applications across our devices are also a very efficient kind of capability. Data wedge, for those of you who don't know, also supports a variety of different inputs. I think most people know data wedge to be a barcode tool, but it also supports our camera. It supports magstripe readers. RFID, though, being the big one here, and of course Bluetooth and ring scanner. So as you can imagine, when you're developing applications now that include RFID, data wedge continues to be your friend. It's a way of abstracting our developers from having to learn the complexities of a data capture and just consuming the results in their applications. Same thing with UDI, multi-barcode, and then even adding voice, whether it's voice text or voice commands, and wedging them in through data wedge is also something very, very simple. And as we start to work more and more on our AI platform and data capture, new forms of data capture, advanced data capture through the camera, you'll see data wedge appearing in our portfolio and continuing to be pretty critical. So when we talk about use cases, we have a guest in the audience, Rachel Ellis. You're going to tell us, I think, a little bit tomorrow about healthcare. She's from Hull Teaching Hospital, I guess it is. And she's going to tell us a little bit about how RFID and data capture in general can play in hospital. But there's a bunch of new use cases on here that I think are also really important. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a highlight on some of the finding and the locating of inventory and with a set of APIs that we used. I told you earlier that the WS50, so the newly named WS501, an improvement to the form factor, but we've added RFID, and this is a product that we had on the WS50. Adding it to the 501 was important. The 501 represents a new platform, expanded memory, so it's an improvement on the current WS50. Which was something that we had some feedback from customers that they needed more horsepower, they needed more juice in this platform. And the use cases here, then we're doing this is we'll be launching this with a big customer, a big T&L customer. Many of you know, they have an X in their name. The importance of these workflows are really, really critical. And I think that the design of the RFID antenna was particularly useful. So the way that they see this is they wear this on their finger. They're capturing and capturing boxes with their hands. So they needed a kind of a downward read so that they could read the package. And you can see that they're using this for a variety of different things. They're trying to determine what package is this, where did it come from. Maybe they're going to use it to actually print a label so that they can relabel the product, and then they're going to determine on which truck does it need to go. They have the upward-facing antenna that's now also reading the different kind of locations. So am I going into the right truck? Have I identified, am I putting the product into the right area? So this whole structure is incredibly efficient. Of course, you can see the wearing style is just literally a mobile computer, full stack mobile computer running Android, connected to the network. It's not proxied. It's not like a traditional Bluetooth ring scanner. It's a full mobile computing stack. And this, again, is very, very small and light, and gives these loaders and these shippers and these sorters full range of motion with their hands. So it's a really pretty cool use case. Some other short-range use cases that you can imagine, you can think about, searching and identifying luggage, whether it's in the airlines, hospitality. I'll show you item finding in a second. I think one of the things we're starting to see is globally, starting in end of this year, but mostly 26, 27, 28, the transportation logistics is having a massive refresh. So there's millions of units that will be refreshing across all the big name transportation companies around the world. And as we're looking at RFPs and we're seeing what they're interested in and how they see the future of mobile computing, one of the things they're most interested in is having RFID. And they want to use RFID for all of these kinds of use cases that you can imagine. Obviously identifying items like on the last page, but also how do you find something in the back of the truck? So we talked to UPS, for example, and they give their drivers 15 seconds to locate a package before they're supposed to stop and drive away. And that's part of their efficiency algorithm, but they really don't want to have to come back. So they feel using RFID to be able to scan and find a package in the back of the vehicle is a really great use case. You can see up at the top the RFID point of sale. So the KC50 is a really flexible product, right? This is, you may not notice it and recognize as kiosks, but you can mount them in a variety of different use cases. And this is using the RFID bin connected to KC50, connected to POS, and allowing for a self-checkout using RFID. And then this is an example of the exit audit I was telling you about. So you can see here, you're scanning around. So what they've done is they've read the receipt with the barcode scanner, and it tells them what should be on and in that basket. They scan it around, and oh wow, there's a $700 Apple Watch that miraculously wasn't on the receipt. So now, without embarrassing anybody or calling anybody out, you can just invoke a tap to pay on the device and literally take their credit card and issue them a new receipt, and out they go. No harm, no foul, no police, no one was hurt. So this is a real use case. We started off as kind of a demo. There's no audio because if you heard it, it was just a bunch of young engineers giggling and laughing and making fun. I think that's why the Captain Crunch is there. But it is a real use case, and Sam's Club has deployed it, and they're really finding a huge amount of efficiency that comes from this. So one thing that I just want to make sure that I communicate in this session is that while we do some amount of software, for the most part, the software that we create, especially on the mobile computing side, is really meant to be kind of an API first. We'll show you user interfaces. Obviously, we want to show you how the APIs that we design work. So if you're familiar with our mobile dimensioning is really a set of APIs. We'll do demos with you, but there's no one that's going to use our application in a workflow. You're going to take those and build it into your own application, right? So we have that. So the ability to use short-range RFID was really, really kind of an important experience for pickers who are looking for hard-to-find items, typically apparel. And what the problem statement is that finding apparel is tough. And if you're working in a big size store, especially if it's a mass merchant store where you have different types of items that you're picking, finding and maybe walking all the way over to the apparel section to not know if you're going to find that black t-shirt in a size, double XL or whatever, prevents people from doing that. So they have the ability just to nil pick it. And so they found that they were constantly getting nil picks on apparel. So if you can imagine a use case where using overhead readers that the inventory is there. So you can't argue that the inventory is not there, but how do you find it? It might still suck having to go there. So we can send the picker over to the area, so they're kind of within 6 feet of where that product is. And now they can turn on the short range read, right? It's reading from about 5 feet, 1.5 meters read range. And it reads, and it'll read and start finding that item. And you can see that it has this kind of a pulsing thing. And for those of you who've used RFID 123, you know that we have this, don't laugh, we have this Geiger counter, which is kind of this, it's not particularly intuitive to use to find, tag strength. So we used a different algorithm in this particular case, but it actually triangulates and allows it to kind of show you directionally where the tag is most likely. And then it gives you a user interface that says you're in the process of locating, and there you found it. So what we're doing here, though, as opposed to looking for all the inventory in the store, we're looking for a single UPC or EPC code, and that is kind of the difference of how this works. And it works really, really effectively to find items. So then we take this idea of being able to look and find a single item that's within arm's reach, and how do you start to combine this? And this is, again, with the breadth and the power of the portfolio, how do you start to combine this in a meaningful way? So we have this thing, and when you hear from Brent tomorrow, he'll probably tell you about macro and micro. So macro is effectively the overhead reading. It's reading all the time. It's doing your perpetual inventory. It's finding things and then kind of locating them, using some algorithms to determine where do we think this item is. The accuracy, though, doesn't get down to 2 or 3 feet. You're probably talking 4 to 6 feet of accuracy with the overhead read. So then, again, we take this information of knowing relatively where it is, and then you go to the micro use case of being able to find an item specifically using the short read RFID, and now we've solved for finding the product. I think what also is really cool, though, is taking the data, and now that we know where something is, with a high level of accuracy, X, Y, maybe even Z for using AR, you can pass this data back to calibrate and recalibrate your overhead system. So this is kind of the dream. We're seeing this, and we're testing this in a couple of big stores in the US. And then this also kind of gives us the ability to play around and use, and start to leverage our AI-based next-gen products as well as our camera-based products. So when you think about how do you find something, how do you locate it, how do you create a more granular level of visibility, as soon as you start using this technology, we're able to not only find items using barcodes and OCR or even recognizing the product, but we can also, more importantly, we're recognizing really dense location. And then we're able to use that again to recalibrate the other systems. So this is kind of an idea of how we combine those things. And now you can imagine this idea, and we talk a lot about this at Zebra, about the realogram and how do you create what is really going on in the store. So we know what some places have planograms, we think we know, or we know how it's supposed to be, but now how do you kind of test against that? And testing it against with the realogram requires a couple of different things. So I showed you that picture where you're using the camera now to locate things on the shelf. And that level of location accuracy requires some recalibration of the data. So we call this ground truth, and we're finding that RFID is a great way of being able to determine ground truth. So if you enter an aisle, for example, you can read that tag, and it helps calibrate your AR engines and various other but in this particular case, it's AR Core from Android. It helps calibrate that because all of those AR technologies tend to drift, and they tend to drift. And so recalibrating them with that is a really fantastic use of the product. And then this, again, allows you to provide really accurate planograms and reelograms for your customers. So I think that this is the time that I have. I've actually made it in my 30-minute slot, which is probably the first almost ever. But I want to reiterate that our partners, especially in EMEA, 99% of the business is through our partners, and so you're incredibly important to making sure that we all realize our dream of proliferating RFID. So tomorrow we're on a panel, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what the future looks like. But I can, the spoiler alert on that is you'll be seeing a lot more RFID integrated to a lot more of our products as we release new products at the end of this year and throughout next. And again, our objective is to democratize RFID, make sure that it's available, more available at and with at a much lower cost than it had been done traditionally. So that's me for now, and I think I'm inviting Gagan up from Impinj, so VP of Systems and Product Management, Gagan from Impinj.